The realtor's hand trembled as she reached toward the barbecue grill in the backyard of 1247 Maple Street. It was October 15th, 2024, a crisp autumn morning in Millbrook Falls, Oregon, and Jennifer Walsh had been showing abandoned properties for 15 years, but she had never encountered anything like this. The house had been empty for over 3 decades, boarded up, forgotten, slowly being reclaimed by nature. Yet here, in the overgrown backyard, the old Weber kettle grill radiated heat like it had been lit just minutes ago. "This is impossible," Jennifer whispered to herself, pulling her hand back from the warm metal surface. She looked around the yard, expecting to see someone hiding behind the towering Douglas firs that surrounded the property. But there was no one. Just the sound of wind through the trees and the distant hum of traffic on Highway 26. Jennifer had come to 1247 Maple Street that morning to assess the property for a potential buyer. The house had been on the market for years, but no one wanted to touch it. Everyone in Millbrook Falls knew the story of the Hartwell family. How they had simply vanished during a Sunday barbecue in 1991, leaving behind one of the most baffling mysteries in Oregon's history. Now, 33 years later, their grill was somehow still warm. Jennifer pulled out her phone with shaking hands and dialed the Millbrook Falls Police Department. The dispatcher who answered was Nancy Chen, a woman who had worked at the department for 25 years and remembered the original case well. "Millbrook Falls Police, this is Nancy." "Nancy, this is Jennifer Walsh. I'm at the old Hartwell house on Maple Street, and there's something very strange happening here." "What kind of strange, Jennifer?" "The barbecue grill in the backyard. It's warm, like really warm, as if someone just finished cooking on it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Nancy Chen had heard a lot of strange calls over the years, but this one sent a chill down her spine. "Jennifer, are you sure? That house has been empty for decades." "I'm positive, Nancy. I can feel the heat coming off it. And there's something else. The picnic table is set. Plates, silverware, napkins. Everything exactly like it was in the crime scene photos from 1991. Don't touch anything else. I'm sending units over right now." Within 15 minutes, 3 police cars were parked outside 1247 Maple Street. Detective Marcus Rivera, a 45-year-old investigator who had moved to Millbrook Falls from Portland 5 years earlier, was the first to examine the grill. "Temperature's about 300 degrees, he said, holding an infrared thermometer toward the kettle. This was definitely being used recently. Detective Sarah Kim, Rivera's partner and a native of Millbrook Falls, stood nearby taking photos. She had grown up hearing the story of the Hartwell family from her parents, who had been neighbors of the missing family. "Marcus, this doesn't make sense. No one has lived here since 1991. The house is structurally unsound. The utilities have been disconnected for decades." Rivera walked around the grill, examining the ground. "Look at this, Sarah. Fresh charcoal, but it's the old-fashioned kind, the kind they stopped making in the early 90s. The discovery was even more puzzling than the warm grill itself. Modern charcoal briquettes are uniform and treated with chemicals that make them easier to light. But the charcoal in the Hartwell grill was the irregular, natural variety that had been common 30 years ago, but was now nearly impossible to find. "We need to call Chief Martinez," Sarah said, "and we probably need to contact the FBI. This is way beyond anything we've handled here." Chief Roberto Martinez arrived at the scene 20 minutes later. A veteran law enforcement officer with 30 years of experience, he had been a rookie patrolman when the Hartwell family disappeared. The case had haunted him throughout his entire career. "Have you found any signs of recent entry into the house?" he asked Rivera. "No, Chief. All the boards on the windows and doors are intact. The seals we put on them last year are unbroken. But someone was definitely here. Recently." Martinez walked to the picnic table and examined the place settings. 4 plates, 4 sets of silverware, 4 cloth napkins, exactly as they had been found 33 years ago, according to the original crime scene photographs. "The napkins are clean," he observed. "No dust, no dirt. If this table had been set for 33 years, everything would be covered in grime." Sarah Kim took more photographs while Rivera dusted for fingerprints. The mystery was deepening by the minute. "Chief, I think we need to tell you the whole story," Sarah said, "for Detective Rivera's benefit, and because we might have missed something important the first time around." Martinez nodded and sat on one of the picnic table benches. The wood creaked under his weight, but it held firm. The Hartwell family disappeared on Sunday, September 8, 1991. It was Labor Day weekend. Tom Hartwell, 38 years old, was a high school history teacher here in Millbrook Falls. His wife, Linda, 36, was a nurse at the county hospital. They had 2 kids, Michael, 15, and Jessica, 12. Rivera listened intently while continuing to examine the grill and surrounding area. Tom was known for his Labor Day barbecues. Every year, he'd invite the whole neighborhood over. Great guy, loved by everyone. Linda was the same way, always helping people, volunteering at the church, organizing fundraisers for the school. "What about the kids?" Rivera asked. Michael was a sophomore at Millbrook High, played on the JV football team. Jessica was in 7th grade, loved to read, wanted to be a writer when she grew up. Normal American family, no enemies, no financial problems, no reason for anyone to want to hurt them. Martinez paused and looked around the yard. Even after all these years, he could still picture the scene as it had been found on that September evening in 1991. The neighbors started getting worried around 6 o'clock that evening. The Hartwells had invited everyone for a 2 p.m. barbecue, but when people arrived, nobody answered the door. The grill was cold, food was still in the refrigerator, but the family was gone. "Were there signs of struggle?" Rivera asked. "None. That was the strangest part. The cars were in the driveway. Tom's wallet was on the kitchen counter with $200 cash in it. Linda's purse was in the bedroom with her jewelry still inside. The house was neat and tidy, no broken furniture, no blood, nothing to suggest violence." Sarah picked up the story. "The initial investigation lasted 2 years. FBI was involved. Search teams combed the entire Cascade Mountain region. Psychics were consulted. Reward money was offered. Nothing. 4 people had simply vanished without a trace. What theories did investigators have? Everything from alien abduction to witness protection to murder-suicide," Martinez replied. "But there was no evidence for any of it. The case went cold in 1993 and has been dormant ever since." Rivera examined the grill more closely. The metal was old and showed signs of weather exposure, but the cooking grate was clean, too clean for a grill that had been sitting outside for 33 years. "Chief, have there been any reports of people seeing lights or activity at this house over the years?" "A few, mostly kids claiming they saw ghosts or lights in the windows. We always chalked it up to imagination or pranks. The house has been secured since 1995, and we do periodic checks. Never found any evidence of trespassers." "Until today," Sarah added. Rivera's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from the forensics lab in Portland, confirming that they could send a team to Millbrook Falls that afternoon to process the scene. "Good," said Martinez. "I want every inch of this property examined. Fingerprints, DNA, soil samples, everything. If someone has been coming here, we're going to find out who." As they waited for the forensics team, Rivera decided to examine the inside of the house. The front door was boarded up, but Martinez had a key to the padlock securing the boards. "We installed motion sensors inside 5 years ago," Martinez explained as they removed the boards. "If anyone had entered, we would have been alerted." The interior of the house was like stepping back in time. Everything remained exactly as it had been found in 1991. Furniture covered with sheets, family photos still on the walls, a thin layer of dust covering everything. But the dust was undisturbed. No footprints, no handprints, no signs that anyone had been inside. Rivera examined the kitchen carefully. The refrigerator had been emptied long ago, but everything else remained in place. Dishes in the cupboards, pots and pans in the drawers, Tom Hartwell's coffee mug still sitting in the dish drainer by the sink. "This is eerie," Rivera said. "It's like they just stepped out for a minute and never came back." In the living room, he found something that made him stop in his tracks. On the coffee table next to a TV guide from September 1991 was a handwritten note in what appeared to be fresh ink. "Chief, you need to see this." Martinez and Sarah hurried over. The note was written on lined paper in blue ballpoint pen, the kind of simple notebook paper that Jessica Hartwell had used for her school assignments. The note read, "We're okay. Don't worry about us. We had to go away, but we'll be back when it's safe. Love, the Hartwells." The handwriting was unmistakably Jessica's. Martinez had seen enough of her schoolwork during the original investigation to recognize her distinctive style. "This wasn't here before," Martinez said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure?" Rivera asked. "Positive. This house has been sealed for years. We've done complete walkthroughs every 6 months. This note is new." Sarah took photographs of the note from every angle, while Rivera carefully placed it in an evidence bag. "The ink looks fresh," Rivera observed, "and the paper isn't yellowed or faded. This was written recently." They continued their examination of the house, but found nothing else out of place. Every room was exactly as it had been documented in the original investigation, except for the note. Outside, the forensics team from Portland had arrived and was setting up equipment. Dr. Amanda Foster, the lead forensic scientist, immediately began taking temperature readings from the grill. "Definitely been used within the last few hours," she confirmed. "The metal is still retaining heat, and I can detect traces of recent combustion." "How is that possible?" Rivera asked. "The house has been abandoned for 33 years. "I don't know yet, but we'll find out." Dr. Foster's team spent the next 4 hours processing the entire backyard. They took soil samples, dusted every surface for fingerprints, and used ground-penetrating radar to search for any recent excavations. The most significant discovery came from the grill itself. Hidden in the ash at the bottom of the kettle, they found something that would change the entire trajectory of the investigation. "Detective Rivera," Dr. Foster called out, "you need to see this." In her gloved hand, she held a small, partially burned piece of paper. Despite the damage from the fire, parts of it were still legible. "It's a phone number," Rivera said, examining the fragment through a magnifying glass. "Area code 503. That's Portland." "There's more," Dr. Foster said. "Look at the back." Rivera turned the paper over. In faded pencil, he could make out part of a date. 202. "September 2024, Sarah said. "This paper was burned just days ago." The discovery of the phone number fragment opened up the first real lead in the Hartwell case in over 3 decades. Rivera immediately ran the number through the police database. "It's registered to a woman named Margaret Chen in Portland. Age 67, no criminal record." "Chen," Sarah said. "Any relation to Nancy Chen at our dispatch?" "I'll check," Rivera said, pulling out his phone. The connection was immediately apparent. Margaret Chen was Nancy's aunt, a retired librarian who had lived in Portland her entire adult life. But more importantly, she had grown up in Millbrook Falls and had been Tom Hartwell's student when he first started teaching in the 1970s. "We need to talk to Margaret Chen," Martinez decided. "Tonight." Orgy. The drive to Portland took 2 hours. Rivera and Sarah arrived at Margaret Chen's modest bungalow in the southeast Portland neighborhood of Hawthorne, just as the sun was setting. Margaret was a small, elderly woman with sharp eyes and a nervous demeanor. When she saw the police badges, she immediately became agitated. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said, inviting them inside. Her living room was filled with books and old photographs. On the mantelpiece, Rivera noticed several pictures of a much younger Margaret with what appeared to be the Hartwell family. "Mrs. Chen, we found your phone number at the Hartwell house today. Can you explain why?" Margaret sat down heavily in her favorite armchair and was quiet for a long moment. "They contacted me," she said finally. "After all these years, they contacted me." "Who contacted you?" "The Hartwells. Tom called me 3 days ago." Rivera and Sarah exchanged glances. This was either the breakthrough they'd been hoping for, or they were dealing with an elderly woman experiencing delusions. "Mrs. Chen, the Hartwell family disappeared in 1991. They've been missing for 33 years. "I know how it sounds," Margaret said. "But it was Tom's voice. I'd recognize it anywhere. He was my favorite teacher, and we stayed in touch for years after I graduated." "What did he say?" "He said they were okay, but they'd been hiding, that they'd had to disappear because someone was trying to hurt them. He said they were ready to come home, but they needed help." "Did he say where they were?" "No, but he asked me to go to their old house and light the barbecue grill. Said it was a signal to someone that they were ready." Rivera felt his pulse quicken. "A signal to whom?" "He didn't say. Just asked me to do it as a favor for old time's sake. So yesterday morning, I drove out to Millbrook Falls and did what he asked." "How did you get into the backyard? The house is secured." "Tom told me where they used to hide a spare key, under a fake rock by the back gate. The key was still there after all these years." Rivera and Sarah spent another hour questioning Margaret, but her story remained consistent. She had received a phone call from someone claiming to be Tom Hartwell, had driven to Millbrook Falls, and had lit the barbecue grill as requested. "Mrs. Chen, we're going to need you to come with us back to Millbrook Falls tomorrow. We may need you to help us understand what's happening." "Of course, officers, I want to help. Those people meant a lot to me." As they drove back to Millbrook Falls that evening, Rivera and Sarah tried to make sense of what they had learned. "Do you think she's telling the truth?" Sarah asked. "I think she believes she's telling the truth. But whether Tom Hartwell actually called her—" Rivera shook his head. "Dead people don't make phone calls, Sarah." "Then who did?" "That's what we need to figure out." They arrived back in Millbrook Falls just before midnight. The Hartwell house stood dark and silent, surrounded by police tape and security lights. But as they drove past, both detectives noticed something that made their blood run cold. There was a light on in one of the upstairs windows, a warm golden light, like someone had just turned on a bedside lamp. Rivera immediately called for backup, and they approached the house carefully. But when they entered, using the key that Margaret Chen had described, they found the house empty and dark. Every light switch was in the off position, and there was no evidence that anyone had been inside. Yet dozens of neighbors would later swear they had seen that light in the window, the same window that had belonged to Jessica Hartwell's bedroom. As the first day of the renewed investigation came to an end, Rivera and Sarah sat in their patrol car outside the Hartwell house, trying to process everything they had discovered. "Tomorrow we start from the beginning," Rivera said. "We interview everyone who was involved in the original investigation. We re-examine every piece of evidence, and we find out who's playing games with us." "And if it's not games?" Sarah asked quietly. Rivera looked at the dark house, thinking about the warm grill, the fresh note, and the mysterious phone call to Margaret Chen. "Then we're dealing with something that's going to change everything we thought we knew about the Hartwell family disappearance." The mystery of 1247 Maple Street was just beginning to unravel, But as Rivera and Sarah would soon discover, the truth about what happened to the Hartwell family was far more complex and disturbing than anyone had ever imagined. Somewhere in the darkness of that September night in 1991, 4 people had vanished without a trace. And now, 33 years later, they seemed to be trying to come home. But the question that would haunt the investigation was simple. Were they returning as the same people who had disappeared, or had something fundamental changed during their decades-long absence? The answers would challenge everything the investigators thought they knew about missing persons cases, and would ultimately reveal a truth so extraordinary that it would be almost impossible to believe. The warm grill was just the beginning. The next morning brought unexpected developments to the Hartwell investigation. Detective Rivera arrived at the station at 6 a.m. to find Chief Martinez already at his desk, surrounded by boxes of files and looking like he hadn't slept all night. "Chief, you've been here all night?" "Couldn't sleep after what we found yesterday. I've been going through the original case files, and Rivera, there are things that don't add up. Things we missed the first time around." Martinez spread out crime scene photographs from 1991 across his desk. "Look at these pictures of the backyard. Look carefully at the barbecue grill." Rivera examined the black and white photographs. In the original images, the grill appeared cold and unused, with old charcoal briquettes still arranged in the bottom. "Now look at this," Martinez said, pulling out a magnifying glass. "This photograph was taken by the FBI on September 10th, 1991, 2 days after the disappearance. See anything unusual?" Rivera studied the image more closely. "The charcoal, it's arranged in a specific pattern, like someone deliberately placed each piece." "Exactly. But at the time, nobody thought it was significant. We assumed Tom had prepared the grill earlier, but never got a chance to light it. But now I'm wondering if it was some kind of message." Detective Sarah Kim arrived at the station with Margaret Chen, who had agreed to help with the investigation. The elderly woman looked nervous but determined. "Mrs. Chen," Rivera said, "we need you to tell us everything you remember about your relationship with Tom Hartwell. Start from the beginning." Margaret settled into a chair in the interview room. "I was 17 when I had Mr. Hartwell for American history. This was 1973, his second year teaching at Millbrook High. He was young, enthusiastic, and he made history come alive for us kids." "Were you close?" "He was like a mentor to me. I was a shy kid, didn't have many friends. My parents had died in a car accident the year before, and I was living with my Aunt Nancy's family. Mr. Hartwell took an interest in my education, encouraged me to apply for college scholarships." Sarah took notes while Margaret continued her story. "After I graduated, I kept in touch with him and Linda. They were like family to me. When Michael and Jessica were born, I sent birthday cards every year. I visited them whenever I came back to Millbrook Falls. When was the last time you saw them before they disappeared?" "Summer of 1990. I came to visit for the 4th of July. Everything seemed normal. Tom was excited about the new school year. Linda was thinking about going back to school herself to get her master's degree in nursing. Did they mention anything about problems? Anyone threatening them?" Margaret hesitated. "Well, there was one thing. Tom seemed worried about something, but he wouldn't talk about it directly. He kept saying things like, 'Some secrets are too dangerous to keep,' and 'the past has a way of catching up with you.'" Rivera leaned forward. "Did he give you any specifics?" "No. But I got the impression it had something to do with his teaching. He mentioned that he'd discovered something in some old school records that troubled him." This was new information that hadn't appeared in any of the original files. Rivera made a note to examine Tom Hartwell's employment records at the high school. "Mrs. Chen, yesterday when you lit the barbecue grill, did you notice anything unusual about the house or property?" "Actually, yes. The back door was unlocked. Not just the gate, but the actual back door to the house. I thought that was strange, since the place has been abandoned for so long. Rivera and Sarah exchanged glances. The house had been secured with motion detectors, and no alarms had been triggered. Did you go inside? Just for a minute. I was curious to see how the house looked after all these years. It was exactly like I remembered it, like they had just stepped out. Did you see the note on the coffee table? Margaret's eyes widened. What note? There was a handwritten note, apparently from Jessica, saying the family was okay but had to go away. That wasn't there when I was inside. I would have noticed something like that. This meant the note had been placed after Margaret's visit, but before the police arrived, someone else had been in the house. After the interview with Margaret, Rivera and Sarah drove to Millbrook Falls High School to examine Tom Hartwell's employment records. The current principal, Dr. James Wilson, had been a student at the high school when Tom taught there. Mr. Hartwell was one of my favorite teachers, Dr. Wilson said as he led them to the records office. Great guy, really cared about his students. His disappearance was a huge shock to the whole community. We understand he may have discovered something troubling in some old school records before he disappeared. Dr. Wilson frowned. That's news to me. But let's see what we can find. The school's record-keeping from the 1980s and early 90s was haphazard at best. Most documents were stored in cardboard boxes in the basement, organized by year but not by subject. Tom would have had access to all of this, Dr. Wilson explained. As department head, he was responsible for maintaining historical records and archives. They spent 2 hours going through boxes of files. Most contained routine paperwork, budget reports, staff meeting minutes, student disciplinary records, but in a box marked Confidential Administrative Files 1975-1985, Rivera found something interesting. It was a thick folder labeled Operation Paperclip Research Project in Tom Hartwell's handwriting. Inside were photocopied newspaper articles, government documents, and what appeared to be research notes. Operation Paperclip, Sarah asked. Rivera had heard of it. It was a secret U.S. program after World War II. The government brought Nazi scientists to America to work on rockets and other technology. The folder contained extensive research about Nazi scientists who had been relocated to the Pacific Northwest in the late 1940s. Tom had apparently been investigating whether any of these scientists had connections to Millbrook Falls. At the bottom of the folder was a handwritten note from Tom. If something happens to me, contact FBI agent Patricia Hawkins in Portland. She knows about the Millbrook connection. Dr. Wilson, was Tom working on any kind of historical research project before he disappeared? He was always working on something. History was his passion. But I don't recall anything specific about World War II or Nazi scientists. Rivera and Sarah left the school with the folder and immediately tried to contact FBI agent Patricia Hawkins. They discovered that she had retired in 2010, but was still living in Portland. Agent Hawkins, now 73 years old, agreed to meet them at a coffee shop in downtown Portland that afternoon. She was a small, sharp-eyed woman who still carried herself with the bearing of a federal agent. Tom Hartwell, she said, when they mentioned his name. I wondered if anyone would ever ask about him again. You knew him? He contacted me in early 1991. Said he'd discovered something important about Operation Paperclip and needed FBI assistance. What had he discovered? Agent Hawkins ordered coffee and settled back in her chair. In 1947, 3 Nazi scientists were relocated to a research facility about 20 miles from Millbrook Falls. They were working on experimental mind control techniques under the MK-Ultra program. Rivera knew about MK-Ultra, the CIA's infamous mind control experiments that had been conducted from the 1950s through the 1970s. One of the scientists was Dr. Klaus Weber, a psychiatrist who had conducted horrific experiments in concentration camps. He was given a new identity and put in charge of a secret research facility hidden in the Cascade Mountains. What does this have to do with the Hartwell family? Tom had discovered evidence that Dr. Weber hadn't died in 1963 as officially reported. He believed Weber was still alive and still conducting experiments, using missing persons from the local area as test subjects. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Missing persons? Between 1950 and 1990, there were 47 unexplained disappearances in the counties surrounding Millbrook Falls. Adults, children, entire families, all vanished without a trace, just like the Hartwells. Did you investigate Tom's claims? I tried to. But before I could make any real progress, Tom and his family disappeared. The case was taken over by other agents, and I was reassigned. The whole thing was buried. Do you think Tom's research got him killed? Agent Hawkins was quiet for a long moment. I think Tom discovered something that powerful people wanted to keep secret. And I think whoever made the Hartwell family disappear has been watching that house ever since, waiting to see if anyone else would figure it out. This put the recent activity at 1247 Maple Street in an entirely new light. Someone lighting the barbecue grill and leaving notes wasn't necessarily supernatural. It could be a deliberate attempt to draw attention to the case. Agent Hawkins, do you have any idea where the research facility was located? According to Tom's research, it was somewhere in the Mount Hood National Forest, accessible only by logging roads, but the exact location was classified above my clearance level. Rivera and Sarah returned to Millbrook Falls with more questions than answers. If Agent Hawkins was right, the Hartwell disappearance wasn't a simple missing persons case. It was connected to decades of government cover-ups and human experimentation. That evening, they decided to examine the Hartwell house again, this time looking for any clues related to Tom's research. They arrived just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown yard. "Look at that," Sarah said, pointing to the upstairs windows. The same warm light they had seen the night before was glowing in Jessica's bedroom window. This time, they were prepared. Rivera had brought night vision equipment and motion sensors. They positioned themselves where they could observe the house from multiple angles. At exactly 8:47 p.m., the light went out. But instead of the house returning to darkness, they saw something that made both detectives question their sanity. 4 silhouettes appeared in the living room window. 2 adults and 2 children, standing together as if posing for a family photograph. The silhouettes remained motionless for exactly 3 minutes, then faded away. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered. "I saw it, but I don't believe it." Rivera's motion sensors hadn't detected any movement inside the house. The security system showed no breaches, yet they had both clearly seen 4 human figures. "We need to go inside," Rivera said. They entered through the back door, which was indeed unlocked as Margaret Chen had described. The house was dark and silent, but Rivera's flashlight revealed fresh footprints in the dust on the living room floor. 4 sets of prints, 2 adult-sized, 2 child-sized, leading from the front door to the spot where they had seen the silhouettes. "This is impossible," Sarah said. "The front door is boarded up from the outside. No one could have entered that way." Rivera examined the footprints more closely. They appeared fresh, but there was something odd about them. The prints were perfectly clear, with no scuff marks or signs of natural walking movement. "It's like they were made by people standing perfectly still," he observed. In Jessica's bedroom, they found something that made the mystery even deeper. On the desk where Jessica used to do her homework was a composition notebook, open to a page filled with fresh handwriting. The entry was dated September 15th, 2024, just 3 days ago. "Dear Diary," it read in Jessica's distinctive handwriting. We're almost ready to come home. The doctor says we've learned enough and can return to our old lives. But first, we need to make sure it's safe. We need to know if anyone else discovered what Daddy found out." The entry continued. "We've been watching the house, waiting for the right person to find us. We think Detective Rivera might be the one. He seems like someone we can trust. Tomorrow we're going to try to make contact." Rivera read the entry twice, his hands shaking. "Sarah, this was written by a 12-year-old girl who should now be 45 years old. Unless what? Unless something happened to stop them from aging." It was a ridiculous theory, but given everything they had discovered, Rivera was beginning to think that nothing was impossible in this case. They searched the rest of the house and found similar diary entries in Michael's room and what appeared to be recent lesson plans in Tom's handwriting in the master bedroom, all dated within the past week. "We need backup," Sarah said. "This is way beyond what we can handle alone." But as they prepared to leave the house, they heard something that stopped them in their tracks. Voices coming from the backyard, children's voices laughing and playing. They approached the back door cautiously and peered out into the yard. In the moonlight, they could see two figures by the barbecue grill, a boy and a girl, both appearing to be teenagers. "Michael, Jessica!" Rivera called out. The figures turned toward them. Even in the dim light, there was no mistaking the faces from the missing persons photographs. Michael and Jessica Hartwell, looking exactly as they had in 1991. "Detective Rivera," the girl said, in a voice that was unmistakably Jessica's. "We've been waiting for you. Where are your parents?" "They're coming," Michael replied. "But first, we need to tell you something important about what really happened to us, and about what's going to happen to other families if you don't stop it." Rivera and Sarah approached slowly, unsure whether they were dealing with genuine people or some kind of hallucination. "We know you found Daddy's research," Jessica said, "about Dr. Weber and the experiments. That's why we had to disappear. He took us." "Who took you?" "Dr. Weber. He's still alive, still doing his experiments. He's been keeping us in his laboratory for 33 years, studying us, testing things on us." "But you haven't aged," Sarah observed. "That's one of the things he's been studying," Michael explained. "How to stop the aging process. We're not the only ones. There are dozens of families at the facility, all taken at different times over the decades." "Yeah? Where is this facility?" "In the mountains, about 40 miles from here, hidden in an old mining complex. But Detective Rivera, you have to be careful. Dr. Weber knows you're investigating. He's been watching you." Jessica reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a GPS unit. "These are the coordinates to the facility, but you'll need help. The FBI, the military, someone with authority. Doctor, Weber has people everywhere, people who help him cover up what he's doing." "Why are you telling us this now?" Rivera asked. "Because we finally found a way to escape," Michael said. "Not just us, but all the families. But we need your help to make sure Dr. Weber can't hurt anyone else." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows were driving up Maple Street toward the house. "They found us," Jessica said, fear in her voice. "You have to go, now." "Come with us," Sarah urged. "We can't, not yet. But take the coordinates. Find the facility. Save the others." Michael and Jessica began to fade, like smoke dissipating in the wind. "Wait," Rivera called out. "How do we contact you?" "We'll find you," Jessica's voice whispered as her form disappeared completely. "When it's safe, we'll find you." Rivera grabbed the GPS device just as the first SUV pulled into the driveway. Men in dark suits began emerging from the vehicles. "Back door!" Sarah hissed. "Move!" They ran through the house and out the back door, using the darkness and their knowledge of the neighborhood to evade the men who were now searching the property. From their hiding spot behind a neighbor's garage, they watched as the men spent an hour systematically searching the Hartwell house and yard with sophisticated equipment. "Who are they?" Sarah whispered. "Government. Has to be. The question is, are they trying to help us or stop us?" When the men finally left, Rivera and Sarah returned to their car and examined the GPS device that Jessica had given them. The coordinates pointed to a location deep in the Mount Hood National Forest, exactly where Agent Hawkins had said the secret facility would be. "So, what do we do now?" Sarah asked. Rivera looked at the device, then at the Hartwell house, where normal darkness had returned. "We go to the FBI. We tell them everything, and we find that facility. And if the FBI is compromised, if some of those agents work for Dr. Weber, then we go to the media. We make this public. We do whatever it takes to save those families." As they drove back to the station, Rivera's mind was racing. The Hartwell case had evolved from a simple missing persons investigation into something that could expose decades of government conspiracy and human rights violations. But first, they had to verify that the coordinates were real and that the facility actually existed. Tomorrow, they would begin planning a reconnaissance mission to the Mount Hood National Forest. If Michael and Jessica were telling the truth, they would find not only the missing Hartwell family, but dozens of other victims who had been subjected to unthinkable experiments for decades. The warm barbecue grill had been just the beginning. Now they were on the trail of one of the most horrific secrets in American history, and somewhere in the mountains of Oregon, Dr. Klaus Weber was waiting for them. The call came at 3:47 a.m., jolting Detective Rivera from a restless sleep. The voice on the other end was distorted, mechanical, but the message was clear. "Detective Rivera, this is Tom Hartwell. If you want to save my family and the others, meet us at Miller's Creek Bridge in 1 hour. Come alone and bring the coordinates Jessica gave you." Rivera sat up in bed, his heart pounding. Miller's Creek Bridge was a remote location about 15 miles outside Millbrook Falls, accessible only by logging roads. It was the perfect place for an ambush or a clandestine meeting. Against every protocol he'd ever learned, Rivera decided not to call for backup. If the Hartwell family had survived 33 years of captivity, the last thing he wanted to do was spook them with a show of police force. He dressed quickly, grabbed his service weapon and the GPS device, and drove into the Oregon wilderness. The old logging bridge hadn't been used for vehicle traffic in decades, but it was still sturdy enough to walk across. Rivera parked his unmarked car at the Forest Service gate and hiked the remaining half-mile through dense evergreen forest. As he approached the bridge, he saw them. Tom and Linda Hartwell stood in the moonlight, looking exactly as they had in the missing persons photographs from 1991. Behind them, Michael and Jessica waited in the shadows. "Detective Rivera," Tom said, extending his hand, "thank you for coming." Rivera shook the man's hand, noting that it felt completely real and solid. Whatever was happening here, these weren't ghosts or hallucinations. "Mr. Hartwell, we need to get you and your family to safety. There are people looking for you." "I know. We've been evading Weber's security teams for weeks, but we had to make contact with someone in law enforcement we could trust." Linda stepped forward. "Detective, what my husband discovered in 1991 was just the tip of the iceberg. Dr. Weber's experiments have been going on for 70 years, and they're getting worse." "Tell me everything," Rivera said. Tom pulled out a worn notebook. "In 1991, I was researching local history for a book I wanted to write about Millbrook Falls. I found discrepancies in population records, missing persons reports that had been buried, death certificates that didn't match burial records." "What kind of discrepancies?" 47 people had disappeared from the area between 1950 and 1990, but there were no real investigations, no FBI involvement, no media coverage. It was like they had been systematically erased from official records. Linda continued the story. Tom contacted the FBI, thinking it was some kind of serial killer, but when Agent Hawkins started investigating, she discovered the Operation Paperclip connection. Dr. Weber? Klaus Weber was brought to America in 1947 under a false identity. He was given funding to continue his research into mind control and genetic manipulation. The official program ended in the 1970s, but Weber kept going with private funding from defense contractors and pharmaceutical companies. Michael, now speaking with the voice of a man in his late 40s despite his teenage appearance, added his perspective. We were taken on September 8, 1991. Weber's team used tranquilizer darts during our barbecue. We woke up in underground laboratories carved into an old copper mine. Didn't. How have you survived all these years without aging? Jessica answered, her voice carrying wisdom far beyond her apparent 12 years. Dr. Weber has been using us as test subjects for experimental anti-aging treatments. We're not the only ones. There are families there who were taken in the 1950s and still look exactly the same. Why didn't you escape sooner? We tried many times, Tom said, but the facility is heavily guarded and it's in the middle of nowhere. More importantly, Weber threatened to kill other families if we escaped. We've been waiting for the right opportunity. What changed? Linda smiled sadly. Weber is dying. Cancer. His security has become lax as he's become more desperate to complete his research. We finally found a way to get word to the outside world. Rivera examined the GPS coordinates on the device Jessica had given him. These lead to the facility? Yes, but Detective, you can't just call in the FBI. Weber has people inside the government, people who have been protecting him for decades. If you go through normal channels, he'll be warned and he'll disappear again. Then what do you suggest? Tom looked at his family, then back at Rivera. We go there together, tonight. While Weber is weak and his defenses are down, we document everything, rescue the other families and present the evidence to the media and the Justice Department simultaneously. It was a dangerous plan, but Rivera realized it might be their only chance. How many people are we talking about rescuing? 43 adults and 67 children, Michael said. Some families have been there for over 50 years. Rivera felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Over 100 innocent people, held captive for decades by a Nazi scientist and his conspiracy of enablers. All right, he said. Let's do it. The drive to the facility took 2 hours along increasingly remote Forest Service roads. Rivera followed Tom's directions while Linda navigated using maps that Tom had memorized during his decades of captivity. The entrance is disguised as an abandoned mining operation, Tom explained, but the real facility is underground, built into natural cave systems and expanded with modern construction. As they approached the coordinates, Rivera was amazed by how well hidden the facility was. From the road, it looked like nothing more than a few rusted mining buildings and old equipment, but Tom led them to a concealed entrance behind what appeared to be a collapsed mine shaft. The security cameras have blind spots, Jessica whispered as they approached. We've been studying them for months. Inside, the facility was a nightmare of sterile corridors and laboratories. Rivera saw dozens of cells containing families of various ages, all looking exactly as they had when they were first captured. My God, Rivera breathed. In one cell, he saw a family that appeared to be from the 1950s, dressed in clothing from that era and looking not a day older than when they had disappeared. In another, a family from the 1970s sat together, reading books that were decades old. Weber keeps us in different time periods, Linda explained quietly. Part of his psychological experimentation. Some families think it's still the year they were taken. At the center of the facility, they found Dr. Klaus Weber himself. The man was ancient, kept alive by the same treatments he had been testing on his victims, but his body was finally failing. He lay in a hospital bed surrounded by monitors and medical equipment, with 2 armed guards nearby. "Tom Hartwell," Weber said in a voice like sandpaper when he saw them enter. "I wondered when you would finally make your move." "It's over, Weber," Tom said. "We're taking everyone home." Weber laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think you can simply leave? You think the world will welcome back people who haven't aged in decades? You'll be studied, dissected, turned into government weapons. That's not your decision to make anymore." Rivera stepped forward, his weapon drawn. "Dr. Weber, you're under arrest for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and crimes against humanity." Crimes against humanity. Weber's eyes gleamed with fanatic fervor. "I've given these people the gift of eternal youth. I've unlocked the secrets of aging, of death itself. You've tortured innocent families for 70 years. I've advanced human knowledge by centuries." The confrontation was interrupted by alarms throughout the facility. Weber's security team had finally detected the intrusion. "We need to move," Tom said urgently. "The exit protocols will seal the facility if we don't get everyone out in the next 10 minutes. What followed was a desperate race against time. The Hartwell family split up to guide groups of captive families toward the exits, while Rivera documented everything with his phone camera. The evidence he captured would later become crucial in exposing the full scope of Weber's crimes. Some of the families were confused and frightened, having been told for decades that the outside world had been destroyed in nuclear war. Others, like the Hartwells, had maintained their sanity and were ready to return to civilization. As they reached the main exit, Weber's security team arrived. A firefight ensued, but the guards were outnumbered by the escaping families and ultimately surrendered. Dr. Klaus Weber died of a heart attack during the evacuation, taking many of his secrets with him, but the evidence Rivera and the families provided was more than enough to expose the conspiracy. The story broke 3 days later, when Rivera, working with Agent Patricia Hawkins and investigative journalists, released documentation of the secret facility and the rescued families. The revelation sent shockwaves through the government and led to congressional investigations, FBI raids on related facilities, and the arrest of dozens of co-conspirators who had enabled Weber's crimes for decades. The rescued families faced the difficult challenge of reintegrating into a world that had changed dramatically during their captivity. Special government programs were established to help them adjust, and significant financial compensation was provided. Tom Hartwell returned to his house at 1247 Maple Street, which the city of Millbrook Falls restored to its original condition as part of a settlement agreement. Linda resumed her nursing career, though she now specialized in helping trauma victims. Michael and Jessica, despite their youthful appearances, had the accumulated wisdom and education of middle-aged adults and became advocates for missing persons' rights. The barbecue grill that had started the whole investigation was preserved as part of a memorial garden created in the Hartwells' backyard. The garden honored not just the Hartwell family, but all the victims of Weber's experiments. Detective Rivera was promoted to chief detective and later wrote a book about the case that became a bestseller. He donated all proceeds to organizations that help families of missing persons. The facility in Mount Hood National Forest was converted into a memorial and museum, documenting one of the most horrific chapters in American government experimentation on civilians. Margaret Chen, the retired librarian whose phone call had inadvertently helped expose the conspiracy, became close friends with the Hartwell family again and was considered an honorary grandmother to Michael and Jessica. Chief Martinez retired with full honors, finally able to close the case that had haunted him for over 3 decades. 2 years after the rescue, on Labor Day weekend 2026, the Hartwell family hosted their first barbecue at 1247 Maple Street since 1991. The entire town of Millbrook Falls was invited, along with the other rescued families and the law enforcement officers who had helped expose the truth. As Tom Hartwell lit the barbecue grill, the same grill that had been mysteriously warm on that October morning in 2024, he reflected on the long journey that had brought his family home. "You know," he said to Detective Rivera, who had become a close family friend, "I used to think that the worst thing that could happen was for people to forget history. But I learned that sometimes the worst thing is when people remember it and use it for evil." "But you stopped it," Rivera replied. "You and your family saved over 100 people." "We all saved each other," Linda said, joining the conversation. "That's what families do." Jessica, now chronologically 45 but still appearing 12, had become a successful author, writing books about resilience and hope. Michael had gone back to school and become a doctor, specializing in treating the long-term effects of trauma. Both children had chosen to remain unmarried, partly due to the complexities of their situation, but mainly because they had found purpose in helping other victims of similar crimes. The memorial garden behind their house had become a pilgrimage site for families of missing persons from around the world. The message engraved on the memorial stone was simple but powerful. Never give up hope. The truth will always find a way. As the Labor Day barbecue continued into the evening, with neighbors and friends sharing food and stories, the Hartwell family reflected on how they had turned their nightmare into a force for good. The warm grill that had mystified everyone in 2024 was now understood to have been lit by Margaret Chen at Tom's request, a request made during one of the brief periods when the family had been able to escape Weber's facility and make contact with the outside world. The ghostly appearances, the fresh notes, and the mysterious phone calls had all been part of an elaborate plan to draw attention to their situation without alerting Weber's security network. "We knew that if we could just get one honest police officer to take the case seriously, we could bring the whole conspiracy down," Tom explained to the gathered crowd. "And we found the right officer," Linda added, raising her glass in a toast to Detective Rivera. As the sun set over Millbrook Falls, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, the families who had been lost in time for decades were finally home. The barbecue grill that had started as a mystery had become a symbol of hope, perseverance, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The case of the warm grill would be remembered not just as one of the most unusual missing persons cases in American history, but as proof that even the most powerful conspiracies could be brought down by ordinary people refusing to give up on finding the truth. In the end, the Hartwell family's 33-year nightmare had become their greatest triumph. The liberation of over 100 victims and the exposure of crimes that had been hidden for nearly a century. The warm grill was never used for cooking again. Instead, it served as an eternal flame of memory, reminding everyone who saw it that no matter how long someone has been missing, no matter how impossible their return might seem, hope should never be abandoned. Because sometimes, against all odds, the impossible becomes possible and families find their way home.